everyone, and welcome once again to the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words, the show where every episode I talk to writers, sometimes agents or other folks in the publishing world, about the work they do and hopefully how their experience can help you become a better writer or even just get started in learning how to get into this crazy business. Before I introduce my guest today, please take a moment, if you haven't done so already, and hit the subscribe button so you never miss a future episode. And if you like what you hear today, and I hope and think you will, tell a friend. It's actually the best way for endeavors like this one to gain an audience. And a nice review is also great, 5 stars preferably. Wherever you catch your pods, that would be great. That also helps people find the show. So all of that is greatly appreciated. And we'll get into it a little bit because my guest today is making a return visit to the show for the first time in 3 years. And I went back and double checked that. It was 2023 was the last time he was here. He is the much acclaimed, award-winning author of 24 novels, including a trio of really fun and interesting series. I got to know him through the one featuring his very idealistic ex-football player turned lawyer Jake Lassiter, which, if you're not familiar, I highly suggest you check out. It's really a great amount of fun. There's the equally fascinating duo of bickering attorneys, Solomon versus Lord. And then he's got a great news series, which we're going to get into here in just a minute, featuring a couple of folks you might have heard of, Charlie Chaplin and Albert Einstein. And as with all of Paul's stuff, it's a lot of fun. And so I'm really glad to have him back here on the show. And you might have guessed maybe from all of this that Paul was once an attorney, which gives him a lot of insight into writing about the legal profession because he has also written many TV scripts for the TV show Jag, which some of you remember was on for several years, I believe, on CBS. But anyway, right now I'm knee deep into the Einstein Chaplin series, and it's really great. I'm really enjoying it. I'm thrilled to have him back here today. Please welcome Paul Levine, and welcome back to the Open Mic. Paul, how are you doing today?
Thank you, Rich. All is well, and thank you for the lovely introduction. And yes, moving from the contemporary courtrooms of Jake Lassiter and Solomon versus Lord to historical fiction period pieces set in the late 1930s and 1940 with those very good friends in real life, Charlie Chaplin and Albert Einstein. Who knew?
Who knew? Well, that's the setting. Tell us a little bit more about the series because I'm reading book 2 right now, but you've written these, I understand, to be standalone. So give us a little bit of the background into what a reader would expect to find if they pick up one of these books.
Will do. 1937 is the setting for Midnight Burning, which is the first of the series, and so far it's just 2, but there will be more. And Midnight Burning brings together the Chaplin and Einstein in Los Angeles at a time in which, in real life, there was a growing fascist movement in the United States that was sort of mirroring what was happening in Germany and in Italy. Einstein, as many people know, fled Germany in 1933 when Hitler came to power and immediately was declared an enemy of the state. All of his property in Germany was confiscated. His beloved sailboat was burned up. A bounty was put on his head. In German newspapers, his photographs would appear, and I wish I could say it in German, but I can't, but the caption was, "Not dead yet." So he arrived as a refugee, as an immigrant to the United States. Thankfully, he was able to get here. And Charlie Chaplin, interestingly, had a terrible, terrible deprived childhood in London. He had an absent father. He had a mother in and out of mental institutions. He was sent to workhouses. We would call them orphanages, but they put them to work. And when they didn't work the way the guards or the reform school people thought that they should be working, they would be beaten with bicycle tires, inner tubes. Um, Both of them had a great feeling for the underdogs. And when Einstein came to Los Angeles on a trip in 1931, he was asked, "Who do you want to meet here?" He said, "Only one person, Charlie Chaplin." And they took him to the Chaplin studios where he was shooting. They had lunch. They became fast friends. They went to, in January 1931, just a few days after they had met, they went to the premiere of City Lights, a Chaplin wonderful, wonderful movie. Now that's all background. What goes on in Midnight Burning is that they must face down a fascist threat that was absolutely real, believe it or not. You know, a lot of the 1930s people forget about.
Yeah.
World War II came along and it sort of swallowed up everything that happened in the 10 years before that. But there was a fascist group in Los Angeles run by a fellow named William Dudley Pelley, who planned both an insurrection against the United States and an assassination plot of about 24 Hollywood figures, including Chaplin. So that is the setup for Midnight Burning.
Well, I'm fascinated by this because, obviously I mentioned your other series and you got some other standalone novels. You were a lawyer, working lawyer, I think for about 17 years. You were a newspaper reporter, which explains why I think you're such a good writer. But there's nothing there that would indicate you had an interest in historical fiction. And so as I'm reading this, I'm going, you're really damn good at this, Paul. So tell me how you got inspired to delve into this genre, because it is, even though there's obviously, a lot of similar things that happen in thrillers and crime fiction, it's historical fiction is still very different. So how did you get involved in or not involved, but how did you get inspired to write historical fiction?
Well, it was a photograph, and it was 20 years ago, a little more than 20 years ago, and I was on the staff of JAG, the CBS show you made reference to, which was a military law show. So I was writing court martials. And I was in the writer's room one day, and I can't remember what I was looking at, but I came across a photograph of Chaplin and Einstein in tuxedos, and they were going into the Los Angeles Theater in downtown LA, which had opened that week. Chaplin financed it, and that was the premiere of City Lights. And I'm looking at this, and I'm saying, there's about 4 or 5 of us writers saying, and I'm saying, you guys know that Chaplin and Einstein knew each other and they're hanging out at a movie theater together? No, nobody knew that. And I go, God, that's interesting. I wonder if I could do a story about Chaplin and Einstein as friends. And somebody said, not on JAG you can't. I said, well, no, I know. Now, the next step is I didn't quite realize the extent of research that is necessary. And I'd written 22 novels or so, all set in present day. Well, when you decide you're going to set a book in 1937, because that's when your real-life heroes lived and when the real-life fascist threat was the opposition, the villains, you have to do so much research. You have to get everything right. What cars did they drive? What clothing did they wear? What expressions were used at the time? What cigarettes did they smoke? And they smoked a lot of cigarettes. Or in Einstein's case, what tobacco did he like? And I could tell you, after much research, I've become friendly with Kristen Hanna, who has written so many wonderful novels of historical fiction. And she loves to do research. I kind of like it too. But for aspiring writers who are doing anything historical or any period piece, I would say this: don't fall in love too much with your research. And I mean this in kind of 2 different ways. Number one, know when to stop. Know when
Hmm.
you have enough, and then anything else, even though you have become interested and intrigued by it, it probably is not going to end up in the book. And that leads me to the second point. Your research is like an iceberg. Only about 15% of it should be visible. And this goes for
Hmm.
the work you have done, it goes for magazine writers, goes for newspaper
Yeah.
writers. You don't dump truck what you have learned into the book or an article
Yeah.
just because you've learned it. Even if
Yeah.
you find it really interesting, does it serve the plot? Does it serve the characters? And if it doesn't do one or the other, you kind of have to leave it out. So that answers, it was a photograph that inspired me, and I didn't quite know what I was getting into in terms of how much time it would take and the depth of the research that would be required. Because not only were Chaplin and Einstein real characters, but William Dudley Pelley is a real historical character, the fascist leader at the time. Charles Lindbergh is in the book. William Randolph Hearst is in the book.
Well, and you know what? Two things. Yes, I'm glad you went to research because I definitely wanted to ask you about that. Um, and I'll 100% verify everything you said. That's one of the hardest things I have when I work with young reporters is that, it's okay to acquire a bajillion pages of research, but one hundredth of that's going to get into the story. So, that's part of it. But there are a lot of other historical characters, Cary Grant and mobsters and politicians and writers. The level of research which you just went into, I think, is impressive just on Chaplin and Einstein, but all of the other extraordinarily well-known figures that were real people. Um, you know, Maybe expand a little bit on how much you had to learn about them as well, and maybe follow up with tell me a little bit about what is it about that era, that time frame in American history. I obviously the photo you saw, but you had to have more feeling for it than that, just to to go through all of that to be able to set your story and live in that world for the length of time it takes to do a novel. Maybe touch on those bases a little bit for me.
Well, I did not know a lot about the late 1930s through 1940 through December 7th, 1941, Pearl Harbor. I think I know a lot about World War II because I've read a lot. My father was an aviator, was a prisoner of war in World War II. But the run up to the war and the isolationist movement in the United States, which William Randolph Hearst was one of the leaders of, and the Chicago Tribune was, which he didn't own, and Charles Lindbergh was, the ties with Nazi Germany that some of the industrialists had, like Henry Ford, and I'm sorry to say Walt Disney. All of this was news to me when I started researching this. And so I was learning at the time. It's not like I knew all of this and now I'm going to tell everybody else about it. And yes, and in the second book, Midnight Patriots, we have Cary Grant, who in real life was a friend of Charlie Chaplin's. They both grew up very poor in England and formed this bond of, can you really believe that we're millionaires? Um, Bugsy Siegel, the gangster between
Right.
LA and Las Vegas, and his henchman Mickey Cohen are in Midnight Patriots. Very colorful characters. I mean, you couldn't make up gangsters who are more colorful than Bugsy Siegel and Mickey Cohen. So as I'm researching the era, these people just pop out. Whether it's Hearst or Lindbergh, William Dudley Pelley, movie stars, it's to me it's fascinating. I hope to the readers it is too. But again, I'm not writing history. This
Hmm.
is not a course in college. It's an entertainment that I hope has under the surface, not hitting people over the head with, is some thematic value that those who can't remember the past are condemned to repeat it. Let's find out, let's know what happened then, particularly the bad things, and not repeat them.
Well, along those lines, like you say, you're not writing a documentary here,
Right.
so anytime we write anything in fiction, you're taking license with people, places, events. When you're writing about really well-known character, right, real people like Einstein and Chaplin and others, you're still going to be taking license with them to tell this fictional, entertaining story. Um, Talk a little bit, if you will, about the mindset that you take into when you know people know enough about these characters. They probably have an image of what Albert Einstein was like or what Charlie Chaplin was like as real people, but you get to actually create this aspect of them. So, how did you approach that part of making them these entertaining characters on the page?
Well, you don't want to get an email or 10 saying, Einstein wouldn't have said that, and Chaplin wouldn't have done that. So you read everything you can, and there's so much written about both of them, and sometimes there are conflicting things written. But one of the things that leapt out at me about Einstein was how great his sense of humor was. So that in person, this is going to sound strange, Einstein was probably funnier than Chaplin. He just had a wry sense of humor, and I wanted to use that wherever I could. Chaplin, off the screen, was very serious, but he was also playful. When they would go to William Randolph Hearst's San Simeon for parties with all the Hollywood celebrities, it was Chaplin who would put on little shows for them. And by the way, everybody knew everybody else in those days. Hollywood was so different. If they weren't having lunch at the Brown Derby or dinner and cocktails at Musso and Frank, they were all invited to Hearst Ranch and Castle up near Cambria on the California coast, and they all knew each other. Um, I tried to capture as best I could things that people are. The opening scene of Midnight Patriots, I'm going to get mail, and they're going to say, you have Charlie Chaplin in bed with Marion Davies, but she was William Randolph Hearst's mistress. Yes, she was for decades. But Chaplin knew her first, and they had an on-again, off-again affair. Even while Hearst was her, what would the word be if she's the mistress? Anyway, he was taking care of her, built her a house on the beach in Santa Monica. When he would travel, Marion would drive over to Chaplin's house in Beverly Hills. And Hearst would actually know this because he had private investigators following her. But it didn't seem to affect the friendship. I have Albert Einstein. It sounds like this is a sexually charged book. In the opening scene of Midnight Patriots, which is on the night of the opening of, boy, it was just...
Oh, City Lights, yeah.
No, the next one,
Oh,
The Dictator.
The Great Dictator,
The
yes.
Great Dictator. Whoa, flew out of my head. 3 years later, the film in which Chaplin lampooned Adolf Hitler and put himself on the enemy's list of Germany by doing that. Einstein is in bed with a woman named Margarita Konenkova, a real historical figure who might have been a Soviet spy. Einstein didn't know anything about America's nuclear program at that time, which barely existed. It was before the Manhattan Project. He certainly didn't know she was a Soviet spy, but he knew her husband because her husband was the sculptor who made the famous bust of him, which is at Princeton. Both of these towering figures, these icons, were flawed. Oh my goodness, they were flawed. As who isn't? And I wanted to capture some of that and not just have myself overflowing with praise about them. Beneath all of those human flaws were two of the most extraordinary people in our history.
Yeah, I've enjoyed reading those scenes entirely, and I just think, and I had heard always too that Einstein had this great sense of humor, so it all felt very real to me. So like I say, I'm really enjoying it. I, we mentioned that there's other characters too, and I'm always fascinated with this because every every novel has secondary characters. That's part of, novel writing. But I'm curious for how you approach the balance between those characters and their storylines and those of your protagonists. Do you write separate storylines for them and then integrate? Do you integrate? Does it work as you go? I mean, how do you approach writing your secondary characters and secondary plot lines?
Well, I have kind of an unwritten rule that unless the secondary character is almost a primary character, unless he or she is really, really important, I don't do their backstories. And some writers who are very successful and critically praised will tell us everything about how the secondary character grew up, what their challenges were, and all of that. When I'm reading that, I'm thinking that the author is sending me a signal that this person's going to be really important to the story, and then I'm sort of disappointed when they're not. So, as opposed to the protagonist, the major villains, the people really close to them who are helping move the plot along, a secondary character who's really secondary, I don't want to take the reader's time to learn everything about them. Now, let's take somebody who's kind of in the middle. Mickey Cohen, the gangster, has a pretty prominent role in Midnight Patriots. He's going to be in the opening scene. He's going to be in the middle of the book. The second half of the book takes place entirely on the Santa Fe Super Chief, the wonderful luxury train that traveled between Chicago and Los Angeles. And on that train, we're going to have primary and secondary characters. Chaplin and Einstein are on the train. A real-life German spy named Fritz Duquesne, ended up in prison years later, is on the train. An assassin, a femme fatale assassin, member of ABWER, the German intelligence agency, is on the train. Two FBI agents, William Randolph Hearst, Charles Lindbergh. You can't service all of these characters in depth because it would slow the story down too much. But you have to kind of sense how deeply to go with each of these people. One of the porters plays a role in the plot on the train, and a union member of the International Association of Porters, I think it was called, the first black union recognized by the AFL way back then, 100 years ago. That person's important to the plot. I'm going to tell you that his wife is a school teacher in Los Angeles, and he's got twin sons who are in dental school, thanks to the union and the decent pay that he gets. But I think there aren't definite black and white rules, but I think it's something you have to sense.
Right. Along those lines, now I mentioned three key series that you've written. Two of them have multiple protagonists. Steve Solomon and Victoria Lord,
Right?
Charlie Chaplin, Albert Einstein, obviously, and then Jake Lassiter, who's pretty much, even though there's many characters, he is the primary character in that series. Do you enjoy more writing a predominantly single protagonist, or having multiple protagonists the way you do in these other series?
Well, what I like about writing Lassiter is I do those books in first person. So it's a joy for me to go into my head and see things, feel things, say things, have the emotions that the character is having. Now, of course, there are limitations when you're writing solely in first person, and that is the reader can only see, hear, think things that he lets you know on the page. But it's a wonderful way for me to create a character. In Solomon versus Lord, in the first book, I do alternating first persons, sometimes in the same chapter, though separated, so that you know whose head we're in. And that's kind of fun too. And for a male author, it really is learning to use some new muscles to write from a woman's point of view. It's challenging. But I like to think I created a pretty good character in Victoria Lord. They're opposites. Opposites attract, which is one of the oldest stories in the book, going back to Shakespeare and Taming of the Shrew and Kiss Me Kate, and on television. You may not be old enough to remember Moonlighting, but
I remember Moonlighting for sure.
Sybil Shepherd and Bruce Willis.
Well,
Opposites.
one of the people on that series lived down the street from me when I lived in West Hollywood, and I would run into him at the Vons on Santa Monica Boulevard. That was a long time
That
ago,
was a
man.
long time
I
ago.
was young, but I wasn't that young.
It was hilarious.
Younger.
Yes, a crime show that was very funny with a male and a female who hated each other, meaning they loved each other. That's part of the genre. Sinatra sang a song, and I can't remember the name of the song, but one of the lyrics is, opposites attract, the wise men say, still I wish we'd been a little more the same, it would have been a shorter war. So that's what I do with Solomon the Lord. In the Chaplin Einstein, it's all third person, shifting points of view. So some of it is from Chaplin, some from Einstein, some of it from the villains. But it's a very interesting question, and it's related to your one about the secondary characters. Would you ever go into the point of view of a secondary character? And I don't think so. I think if you do that, you are announcing to the reader that this isn't a secondary character. We're
Right.
going to see and hear that person through the eyes of someone else, or the omniscient narrator, if that's the point of view that the author is taking.
You know, when you were on the show before, since we were just talking about Jake Lassiter, let me circle back to that for a minute. That series was just wrapping up, and you had a long character arc where he had developed CTE, which is short, the acronym for something much longer that I can't pronounce. Um, and of course, spoiler alert for anybody who hasn't read the series and you don't want to know, take 2 seconds here and step aside. But that was where he was coming to the end, shall we say. When we were talking recently at Left Coast Crime, I believe you told me that he might be coming back. Is that true?
Well, let's take it one step at a time. Yes, Jake developed, because of repetitive head injuries from playing NFL football, um, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE. Now, once you give a character that, if you're going to stay with the series, CTE is always fatal. We don't have a cure. We don't have an accurate diagnosis except in an autopsy. And when Jake was diagnosed with symptoms consistent with CTE and was told that, he said, I'll do a lot of things, spinal tap, experimental drugs, magic mushrooms, but no autopsy. So the book you're referring to is Early Grave, which sort of gives away something in it. I still think that it's one of the books that's gotten the most critical acclaim and the most letters. There are many ways to write another Lassiter book. One, the easiest is to do a prequel. Go back to him as a young lawyer. But I never do things an easy way. I'm going, and I'm writing it right now, 7 years later. Because in Early Grave, he was representing his godson in a personal injury case, and his godson was injured severely in a high school football game.
Hmm.
He has grown up to be a first-year lawyer. And unlike most lawyers, he hears voices, unlike most people. He sees Jake Lassiter. Jake is with him when he tries cases, talks to him. Well, is he really with him, or is it just in his head? And not sure yet, but that's the setup, and it's called Lassiter's Ghost. But I don't think he's a real ghost.
I love that. I absolutely love it. I can't wait to read that. Um, I assume, are you working on that now? Is it
Yes,
where's that in the process?
I am working on that now. Just wrote a flashback scene today, which is another thing you can do to keep a character going. Um, and of course, no one else can see or hear Jake. So, ripe for comedy is a scene where his godson, who's now a first-year lawyer, Rodrigo Pittman, um, is going to see a therapist, and Jake is there whispering things in his ear that gets him all unnerved and makes him look delusional. Maybe he is delusional. It's a fun story to write.
Well, that is a perfect lead into a question I wanted to ask you about using humor. Because you're not a comedy writer per se. If you're watching on YouTube, you're seeing me do the air quotes. But your books and these characters have all had what I think's very realistic humor. Sometimes it's gallows humor, which is very common for people in high, stress positions. Uh, Sometimes it's just the character's natural smartass attitude, like Jake Lassiter. Um, but tell me your approach to writing comedy or humor, I should say, into these serious situations that are found in thrillers and crime fiction.
Well, when I was a trial lawyer, I was always surprised at how much humor there really was in a courtroom. Although it takes only a little spark of something funny to have a gallery bursting out in laughter because the rest of the proceedings are so serious and often so dull. In Lassiter, yeah, Lassiter is a wise guy, and he gets in trouble with a judge, and the judge says, "You persist in this line of questioning, Mr. Lassiter. I'm going to send you to a place you've never been." Jake says, "Already been to jail, Your Honor." And the judge says, "I'm not talking about jail. I'm going to send you to law school." So the, these things sort of come naturally to me when I put on my wise guy hat. And he can be irritating that way.
I love it. Um, I've seen lately more good writers who are coming from TV backgrounds in the crime fiction and thriller genre. And I can generally tell because chapters are tight, they're fast, the stories are usually really fast paced. And I'll go look up an author, and sure enough, they wrote for TV. Obviously, you have this experience too. What did you learn or take away from your time writing TV scripts that interplays with the work you do as a novelist?
Well, you hit on it, Rich. I write shorter scenes, tighter scenes, shorter dialogue, tighter dialogue. Because when you're working in television, and I was working on a network show where you really have about 54 minutes out of the hour at most to tell your story in 4 acts. We talked about a 3-act structure, but it was 4 acts because there were 4 commercials. You've got to move. You can't waste time. You can't recap and sum up. And the dialogue has to be pop, 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 pop. And I'd like to think that I do that in the books also.
Yeah, it really is a hallmark of your writing. I think if anyone out there has not discovered your writing, I think it doesn't matter what book they pick up. I think that is something that they're going to find as a consistent theme with your writing. Your
Thank you.
stories are always they're fast paced. There's always a little undercurrent of humor. It and they really just move along at a really great pace. It's not they're not overly fast, but they're just a really entertaining read. You're one of the more entertaining authors out there today, I will tell you.
Thank you, Rich. Thank you very much.
You
Well, I
know,
hope
along those
people,
lines, you and I have talked before
yeah.
about the importance of writing a great first line, and you've actually received some, I believe, at least one award, but I'll just generally, again, acknowledge that someone who writes great first lines to start books, um, which I think in this world is more critical than ever because we live in such a short attention span society these days with all the social media and everything. Um, is that something you still spend a lot of time on with this new series where you're writing, you know, in historical fiction? Is that still a big focal point of your writing?
Well, in, in Solomon versus Lord, or in the second of that series, The Deep Blue Alibi, starts with a really, really short line. I'm going to contrast that with the new book. In the really short line was a quote from Victoria Lord. Forget it, Steve. I'm not having sex in the ocean. And I think that may make you want to read the second line. They're floating off the beach in Key West in their patter going back and forth, and then a boat comes and nearly hits them and beaches itself, and all this money falls out. But all right, that's a real short puncher. This is Midnight Patriots, the newest book. This is much different. I wasn't going to do this, but may I read the opening sentence?
Please.
Yeah. Let's see if I can find it. Part one. I have 4 parts of this book. Part one is called Passion and Patriotism. Chapter 1, Thursday, October 31st, 1940, in italics. It was a Halloween night filled with passion and betrayal, patriotism and treason, threats and treachery, and a sucker punch to the gut. So that's, I hope, sets the scene.
I loved it. It's one of the reasons I asked that question is because um, I actually, it's one of the things I feel like I learned from you from our very earlier conversations, or at least inspired me to start putting a lot more time into my own first lines of things. I spent a lot of time, sometimes too much time, writing those things, but I do think it's gotten better because I do think you have to grab people quickly now, more quickly than ever before.
I'll give you a good first line I didn't write. It, it comes from the old novels. I hope I pronounce it correctly. Scaramouche, am I saying it correctly?
Hmm.
He was born with the gift of laughter and a sense that the world was mad. That's hard to beat.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Well, because we remember so many of them, you know, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times.
Yeah.
Call me Ishmael. You can go on down the line, right? Those are so many of the lines that we remember from literature throughout history have been first lines, you
Yes.
know. Now, of course, you remember Stella and all of those things, but a lot of great first lines are the ones we seem to remember the most. Um, now we noted, okay, Midnight Patriots is the second. You already said there's going to be more of the Einstein Chaplin books. Again, as a looking at it through the historical lens, is there a finite amount of what kind of trouble you can get them into? I mean, when you're working in a specific time frame like that, or do you feel like, oh gosh, I could create so many things for them to get involved in together?
No, one of the things that makes it finite is that Einstein died in 1955. So I've got this time period to work with, and I am going to be, the next book will be Korean War based, but now we're already in early 50s. So yes, unless again I go back and do a prequel.
Time is undefeated in that regard. You know,
Defeated.
I'm really glad too that you noted earlier. I meant to follow up on this a little bit. I think, well, we do a very bad job in this country anymore of teaching history, but there was an active Nazi fascist movement in LA. There was a very active one on the East Coast in New York City. I think a lot of people don't know, there was a huge rally, Nazi rally at Madison Square Garden in 1939. There was
Yes.
there was a huge isolationist movement in the United States of America at that time. There was a lot of feeling toward the German side of these things that, Pearl Harbor changed most people's attitude about the war, but also it was interesting that there was this feeling about Nazi Germany in comparison to how we felt about our relationship with England. Maybe because that's who we had to fight to gain independence. I don't know, but um, I always find those things really fascinating because I do think a lot of people don't remember how deeply ingrained we were with, and so was England. There were
Yes.
was we know there was connective tissue there. I mean that's the ultimate battle in mankind forever is those who want to dominate and coalesce power and those who are trying to have greater freedom for more people, and we're living it today here in 2026. I don't know if it's ever going to end but we won't get off on that tangent. I just do appreciate that you reminded us all that, yes, by the way, there was a pretty active Nazi party in Los Angeles as well.
Huge.
Uh, so I always like to end the show, and as always, we could talk about all these things forever. But I like to end the show. We're pretty much on time, so I'm gonna end the show with what I hope is a fun question. I mean for it to be a fun question. I'm going to give you the option. We're going to say that I am omniscient and I can put you together with one of the following three people for dinner, drinks, whatever it is, a swim, a horseback ride, whatever would make you happy. Who would you choose and why? There's always a theme. Most people figure out the theme pretty quickly. The options that I'm going to give you are D.W. Griffith, Thomas Edison, and Alice Guy Blaché. Who of those three eminent folks would you choose and why?
D.W. Griffith was actually a partner with Chaplin and Mary Pickford and, and Mary Pickford's husband.
Oh, Douglas Fairbanks.
Thank you very much. When they formed United Artists. But of those four, I think to me, he'd be the least interesting. Edison was a difficult person, really, really a difficult, very litigious. Maybe
Hmm.
he could have hired Jake Lassiter. He was always suing over patent infringement and everything else. Who was the third person?
Alice Guy Blaché.
Please tell me who that is.
She is generally acknowledged as maybe being the very first female filmmaker in France in the late 1890s. She was a producer, a director, a cinematographer, occasionally an actress. She's not well known here in the United States, but her work is foundational for a lot of filmmakers, including Griffith and others who followed after her.
Well, I'm going to choose her because
All right, then.
just like we were talking before, I like to learn things.
There you
And
go.
you just
Well,
taught me something now, and I want to learn more.
the theme, for those who may not have captured that, obviously, was the filmmaking connection. Edison, of course, with his
Right.
technology. Griffith, who, in spite of being a horrible, horrible human being,
Right.
was a very, very skilled filmmaker. Uh, I saw Birth of a Nation a couple of different times in film courses. You really have to swallow hard to get through the whole thing because it is a horrifyingly racist movie. But from a technical standpoint, and I can't remember what year the movie came out, it was a marvel, much the way Citizen Kane was a technological marvel in 1939 when it came out. I think it was 1939. But yes, he's a horrible human being. As you
Yes.
mentioned, Thomas Edison, not the easiest chap in the world either. I don't know what kind of person Guy Blaché was, but she was at least as accomplished as they are, and she was a woman at a time when no women were out
Right.
being in these industries getting that kind of power, kind of Mary Pickford like in a way, in that she saw she had a chance to gain some control of her life, and she took it. And being married to a very Paul and I think are both married to very strong and strong-willed women who succeed in the world. often dominated by men. I'm super interested in learning more about her myself. So there you go. That was Paul's choice. So. Well, Paul, thanks again. It is always a pleasure to talk to you and to have you on the show. I hope, if you don't mind, hold up Midnight Patriots one more time for
Midnight Patriots.
for the folks that are on the YouTube show. Midnight Patriots by Paul Levine. I love the cover too.
Thank you. It's
I think you got the other one there too.
it's similar to the cover of Midnight
Yeah,
Burning.
Midnight Burning.
So
Oh,
we have a
yes.
Nazi officer in the middle of Midnight Burning, and we have a German femme fatale in the middle of Midnight Patriots.
There you go. Well, if you are on the YouTube show, there's your value added that you get to see those covers. But wherever you can find Paul's books, everywhere books are sold. I highly recommend all of his work. Like I say, I'm pretty sure I read every Jake Lassiter
Wow.
book. Really was a great series, and I'm really enjoying the Chaplin Einstein series too. So I highly recommend that. So
Thank you, Rich.
thank you
Thank you
so much
very
for
much
coming
for
on the
having
show.
me.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. Anytime, and I'm sure we'll talk again. Before I cut out, I'm going to remind all of you, if you haven't hit subscribe, please do so, or tell a friend. That would be great. And remember my motto, which is the same all the time, and I mean it all the time. Tomorrow's not promised to any of us, so whatever you do, make today count. Until then, this has been the Open Mic Writers in Their Own Words with my guest, Paul Levine. We will see you next time. Take care.